A few months ago, EMAX released the CineHawk, a 3.5-inch drone that was able to fly outdoors and follow fast-moving objects. But that drone was a bit too cumbersome and you really couldn't fly it indoors. Well, EMAX is back again with a newer yet smaller version of that drone in the CineHawk Mini. So let's open this up and see if we get the best of both worlds. Okay, so here's this CineHawk Mini, and in traditional EMAX fashion, you have a white box here with a picture of the drone. In the back, you have some of the contents in here, but let's just open this up and see what's inside. All right, first you got a foam pad here. Then you have your EMAX stickers, which is pretty cool. You have a QR code to get to some of their manuals and their website. Then you also have a pretty nice card here that tells you the direction of the propellers to install them. So in case you replace them, you know that this thing is going to be a props in configuration. All right, cool. There's also some warning on the back here saying, do not keep this thing plugged in for a long time. That will overheat the VTX, which is cool. And I guess they're kind of targeting this towards beginners. And besides that, you have a disclaimer card here for saying you want to fly this if you're above 18 years of age. So EMAX has you covered with all the disclaimers. Besides that, you have some propellers on here. You have 2 spare propellers, and it looks like 2 harnesses in here. It looks like the harness maybe for your VTX. Besides that, you also have a bag here with some camera mounts. I will be using this today. Now, this thing can support all the major cameras and VTX on the market. Today, we'll be using the DJI-03 camera to see how this thing here performs. Last but not least, you have a bag here with some screws, and these seems to be the screws to actually mount the camera to the actual camera mount, as we said before. And finally, here is the CineHawk Mini. Now, this thing here is super light, guys. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the CineHawk Mini. And the first thing that jumps out to me is these propeller ducts and this camera mount design. Now, this thing here is obviously plastic, and that does 2 things. Obviously, this thing here is going to be very, very durable because these ducts are pretty thick, but it's also very, very light. Now, this CineHawk Mini here is taking on of the trends that we've seen recently where manufacturers are making drones without the VTX. So this thing is very light, but there is no VTX included. You do have to provide that with this drone. I think EMAX is saying it's BYOV, which is bring your own VTX. And it's a trend we've been seeing recently in the FPV market. And that gives you a lot of flexibility. It reduces the overall cost of the drone, so you have a lower overall cost for yourself and the manufacturer. But you can also use your existing VTX if you're a specific user, say it's DJI, Walksnail, or even HD0, you can put your specific VTX in here. So let's weigh this and see how much it weighs because it feels super light. All right, 105 grams. This thing is super light. This thing weighs as much as a small cinewhoop. So I do think I could probably get this under 250 grams. Now, they did advertise this as a sub 250 drone, but this thing here is so light, I do suspect using the recommended battery, we might be able to get under 250 grams. Now, as I said before, these ducts are pretty cool and light. Even the under tray here to support your VTX is also plastic. And I can see a lot of weight savings here. Even this strap on here, this is one of the thinnest straps I've ever seen in a drone. Now, this is supposed to support a, I think, 850 milliamp hour battery. And that should do a pretty good job supporting the battery to this mount here. Now, talking about this mount, we talked about this camera mount also being plastic. It's a pretty interesting design. Now, this is supposed to be a cinewhoop to deliver smooth cinematic images. And I do suspect this is gonna do a good job because we do have these rubber dampers on here, and that connects to the actual camera mount here, which is really good to reduce vibration going to the camera. But the interesting thing about this one is kind of unique and different. I've never seen a battery tray that's also dampened because this is also the battery tray and the camera mount. So you will have to put a battery on here. That's gonna make this a little bit heavier, but I'm sure these grommets on here are probably tuned. Hopefully they're tuned for or to support a battery on here. So very interesting design, but it is dampened and that should reduce the vibration going to the camera. Now, below that you have the carbon fiber frame on here. Looks like a 2 to 3 millimeter carbon fiber frame, and this thing supports all your motors, propellers, and the flight controller. Now, talking about the motors attached to the frame on here, these are the EMAX Eco 2 1303.5. And these things look a little bit small, to be honest with you. I've seen some other drones in the market, some other 2.5-inch drones, and they have a little bit larger motors. Now, this is a significantly lighter drone compared to the competitors, so maybe this should be enough for this. Only time will tell. Once we take it for a flight, we'll see if this has enough oomph or thrust to keep this thing in the air and deliver smooth images. Now, the size isn't really a bad thing. That may also contribute to longer flight times. And EMAX is saying with the recommended 850 milliamp hour battery, you get around 7 minutes of flight time. So we'll see if that's true or not. Now, connected to the motor, you have your propellers here. This is obviously a 2.5-inch drone, so you have your traditional EMAX propellers. These are the EMAX Aven Rush propellers, and they're in the traditional EMAX color and design. Very radical and wild with these twists and these blades on here, but I have to say that these things have been pretty good on my other drones as well. So EMAX, they do make some pretty good propellers. Now, besides that, in here you have the flight control, and ESC, you have an F45 flight control in here, and we'll see if this thing has a good tune on here and if it's adequate for these small motors, but I do suspect it's probably well and appropriate for this size of drone. Now, connected to your flight control, you have your receiver. We have the antenna for the Express LRS receiver on here. This one is specifically mounted in the front. Typically, you have it in the back, but it really doesn't matter whether it's in the front or the back. My main concern is whether this thing is being blocked by the carbon fiber frame and the motors. But in essence, if you can get out there, once you turn around, coming towards you will have a better signal, so this is not really a bad placement for it. It is pretty close to the propellers, but it's in a sturdy location on here. Now, it's kind of hard to see on here. As I said before, this is a BYOV, bring your own VTX, and there is a plug-in here for modern VTX, making this a plug and play. Finally, in the back here, you have your pigtail here. This is an XT30 connector, and then you have a capacitor built into the connector right here. As I said before, we'll be using a 850 milliamp hour battery. I have a few different configurations of that battery, and we'll see how it fits on this frame here and see if it affects the vibration or image quality going to the camera here. Now, last but not least, you have a small little Easter egg on here. You have a little plate here for a GPS, and this one here is very, very small. I don't know how effective it's going to be, but if you do have a small GPS antenna, it could be mounted on the hair, and you have a little hole here so that the antenna can get the satellite. So that's pretty cool. So having said that, let's put our VTX in here, flash our receiver, and take this for a flight. Okay, so we're back from our flight test, and the CineHawk Mini did a pretty good job. So let's jump right into the flight characteristics. Now, today's weather wasn't the most perfect for drone flying. We're talking about winds between 10 and 15 miles an hour, a little bit on the lower end between 12 miles an hour. And you can see in the image that the trees were swaying really aggressively. So this did have an impact on our drone today due to the lightness of this drone. Now, talking about that, let's just weigh this drone now that I have the camera and VTX in here. And we have our scale zeroed out. Let's put this on here, see how much it weighs. So 144 grams, not too bad. Before we weighed this without the VTX, it was around 105 grams. So I did fly this with two batteries. We have our 850 milliamp hour battery and a smaller 850 milliamp hour battery as well. And let's see if this thing comes under 250 grams. And as you can see, 239. So this is sub 250, and this is due to all the lightweight parts, particularly the ducts on this drone, making this very, very light. And here's the second battery, 213 grams, so even lighter. And this is the one that they actually recommend. This is an 850, but a flatter style 850 milliamp hour battery. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the battery life on this drone. Now, despite the weather, this CineHawk Mini did a really good job with its flight characteristics. This thing was really composed, and the first thing I noticed when I took off was this thing was really easy to fly. Now, I think that's due to the lower rates on this drone. This thing is a lot lower compared to some of the competition on the market, and that makes for a really easy and docile flying drone. Now, some other pilots may not like those lower rates on their drones, but for me personally, I do think it fits me very well, and it's, to me personally, the perfect rate for my flying style. Now, this does make the drone fly a lot smoother, which is what you want to get in a cinewhoop or a drone that's capturing smooth cinematic 4K images. It also helps if you're going to fly this indoors that you have those lower rates. Now, if you're the pilot that wants a little bit more responsiveness from this drone, you can easily go into beta flight and change the rates on this drone. Now, I do think the pitch rate is pretty decent but the roll rate is a little bit low, especially if you're gonna do some light acro maneuvers. Now this is not an acro or freestyle drones, but I did try some of those maneuvers while I was flying, and that did show up when I was trying to recover or do some light acro maneuvers. Now doing some power loops, it was okay, but you can see when I'm doing some rolls, it was very, very slow. It was smooth, but it was very, very slow. And I've seen some other drones with some higher rates on there. Now, talking about the acro capabilities of this drone, this isn't an acro drone by any means. You can see these bigger style ducks on here. But I do wish that this drone had a little bit more power, because when I was doing some dives or some loops, I was almost at 100% throttle in the recovery. Now, these motors here aren't that large. They're talking about 1303.5. And they were adequate for doing what this drone was designed for, which is smooth cinematic images. But there were some times I felt I wanted just a little bit more power, just a little bit more power here in the drone. Now that showed up multiple times when I was flying today in today's weather, because it was so windy. In particular, as I said before, recovering from a dive, but sometimes when I'm flying in strong winds, you can see that, you know, when I'm flying perpendicular to the drone, I would have to either bank into, which is normal for any drone, and we have bigger ducks on here. But the real issue came when I turned into the wind. So say, for example, I'm doing a cinematic scene and I want to have a constant velocity or speed in my image. As I'm going, say, downwind or with the wind, obviously it's flying a little bit faster. As I turn into the wind, this drone here slows down dramatically. And it's to the point where I'm somewhere close to 100% throttle, trying to maintain my same speed. Now that requires a lot more throttle, therefore now I have to change both the pitch and the throttle to maintain the constant speed. Now that's gonna change the framing on your viewfinder or for your goggles. And if you're doing a cinematic work, then that may show up in your work. Now, I don't think this is gonna be like some kind of a movie making device, but at the same time, that is a concern due to the lightness and just the lack of thrust in these motors. But overall, guys, this drone here performed very, very well. It exceeded my expectation. It was so easy to fly. It is confidence inspiring, guys. And it did what it was designed to do, and that was to capture smooth cinematic 4K images. Okay, so moving on to the video quality of the CineHawk Mini. And I have to say that the image coming from this drone was really, really good. Never once did I have any issues, vibrations, or jello in my image. And as you saw in the introductory video, this thing was very, very smooth. Never once did I have any issues with the camera picking up vibrations, even to the point where it surprised me, because I was expecting some vibration in the DVR recording, because while I was flying this with the strong winds and this thing being a light drone, there were some micro vibrations in my FPV feed in the goggles. And I kind of figured that would show up in the DVR recording, but nope, I took a look at the recording and this thing was awesome. So this overall design, guys, does remove any vibration going to the camera. I did fly this with the Rocksteady on, so this thing was built-in stabilization was on, and it did a really good job. Really impressive, guys. No issues here at all. So overall, this thing worked pretty well. The image is really good, no qualms about it. We know the image from the 003 is pretty good. Now I had this thing completely in automatic mode with the 003 in here. The only thing I did change was just the white balance, only because it's so bright outside. But you can get better image quality if you put an ND filter on here and change the settings to your liking. So maybe flying this thing in the flat profile and therefore editing this image in post. But overall, it did a pretty good job. And I must say, it was really nice. This thing interacted really nice with the drone. And it was simply a plug and play affair, guys. Just one wire, it's already installed in the flight control. Just plug it to your VTX. And this thing is already set up to the point where even in the menu in beta flight, this thing was already set up for HD, which is what we have here in this drone. Okay, so moving on to the flight times of the CineHawk Mini. Now, Beta FPV recommends an 850 milliamp hour battery. I have two right here. I did fly with this 850 Lava battery here from Beta FPV. This is a new battery on the scene here, as well as a flatter type 850 milliamp hour battery here from Race Day Quads. Now this is the one they recommend, the flatter style, I think because it's lower profile, it's also lighter, might give you longer flight time. And EMAX says you're gonna get around 7 minutes of flight time with this style of battery. Now I didn't get 7 minutes, I actually got an average of 8 minutes of flight time. Yes, 8 minutes of flight time with the Lava batteries here, 850 milliamp hour battery, and it still performed pretty well. It was maneuverable, so I had no issues with this larger style of battery. And I did get over 7 minutes of flight time with the smaller, I guess thinner style of battery here, also 850 milliamp hour battery, and it worked really well, guys. So I did get better than advertised performance from this drone. Now, one thing I have to mention here, or two things actually. One is this battery here is new. I mean, really new. I probably have only like 5 to 7 flights on this battery, so it's brand spanking new. Therefore, your performance and mileage may vary based upon the age of your battery. Now, the smaller one I did get around 7.5 minutes of flight time, and that's kind of what they were expecting. Now, the second thing is that I was flying kind of a smooth swooping flying, as you can see, navigating through the trees. I wasn't doing too many aggressive maneuvers. I did do some loops, some rolls, and some dives, some flippy floppies, but not constantly. So I do suspect if you're gonna do some freestyle maneuvers or a whole flight that's freestyle, you might get between 5 and 6 minutes of flight time. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with this flight time, and I do suspect that comes from these lighter plastic ducts as well. We talked about these motors and props on here. I think the majority of the performance comes from these smaller motors, conserving a lot of battery, guys. But overall, flight time on this is pretty good. Now, as far as RC link on the CineHawk Mini, we have an Express LRS receiver here with an external antenna in the front. Now, I never once did I have any issues with this setup right here. I was kind of curious about the setup in the front. Not really the front, but it's being blocked by the actual frame, the ducts, and the camera on here. It's kind of buried in here, but this thing performed very well. Never once did I have any issues. It got to the point where I got so comfortable pretty easy. I was flying this thing over water in multiple locations, so never once did I have an issue. I think I got down to around maybe 97 on the link quality and nothing below that. So Express LRS is the way to go. Obviously, if you haven't had Express LRS in your fleet, I would highly suggest it. This worked out pretty good and no issues at all, guys. So yeah, Express LRS, thumbs up, pretty good. Okay, finally, let's talk about the design and durability of the CineHawk Mini. Now, this thing here is kind of a hit and miss when it comes to design and durability. Overall, it's pretty positive. As far as the durability, I didn't have the opportunity to actually crash my drone during my testing phase of this drone, but I do say that this thing here is pretty good. These ducts here are pretty big and chunky, as we talked about before. But this thing is made out of a flexible plastic material, and I don't see any reasonable way this thing would actually break. This thing would be actually a little bit more durable than most of the other drones in this segment. But I do understand why EMAX went with this. This is more of a compromise to increase the durability of this drone. And as I said before, this thing is probably going to withstand a whole bunch of impacts pretty easily, but it does come at the sake of aesthetics. Now, this plastic here isn't the most premium. It doesn't look fancy. It's very scratchy and feels very cheap on here, but it does do the job and it's very light. So that's where we get those longer flight times. Now, besides that, the design on this is kind of interesting. I had some concern about the design of this frame, more specifically the actual ducts on here. Now, as you saw, I have the O3 camera and VTX in this drone, but I did have a lot of trouble trying to install this, only because there's really no passageway for my wires in the back and for my wires in the front. So I have my camera up here, I have my antenna up in the back here, and although they made a way for this antenna to go through, the wires come up through here, but there's really no way for this wire to go to the actual VTX. So because of that, I do have my wires on the outside of this actual frame or ducts, as well as the front. These things are just hanging on here, waiting for the propellers to just chop them up. And I don't know how EMAX missed that, or maybe I just installed it wrong. I've been building drones for a while, but I may have made a mistake, I don't know. But as you can see right here, I have this VTX wire here, antenna wire, on the outside. Now, it's pretty close to the propeller, it's not gonna touch, but I do think that EMAX should have made maybe a millimeter or two wider or pathway between these standoffs or lower plate right here, because there's no way for these wires to go from under here or from the antenna to the VTX. Same with the front. So because of that, the wires have to come through the side, and I have mine above the actual Express LRS antenna. This little container here, this little box where you have all your electronics, and VTX, it's completely sealed. There's no pathway to get in and out of it. Now we have some holes on each side here, but all of these holes on each side here is near the propeller. So that's not, it wasn't designed for the wires to come out here. These holes are only for ventilation and to access your SD card and the bind button. I don't know if other reviewers are having the same issue or have same concerns. I mean, it did work, it does work. You really can't go under the flight controller. In fact, you don't want to touch the flight controller because that could affect the gyros. But it's interesting. Now that could be rectified obviously with a duct design or maybe in version 2 of this drone here. And I do think they'll make it a little bit neater where you can organize or manage the wires a little bit better. Now my second concern with this frame overall is, why is there no action cam mount on this? Now I understand there's smaller drones in the market like 2-inch drones, or even smaller drones like the Pavo Pico, which is really small, like a 1.6-inch drone. And it's understood that those drones can't carry an action camera. They can carry an O3 or any kind of modern VTX, but a 2.5-inch drone should be able to carry a light or naked action camera. In fact, all of the other 2.5-inch drones in the market have an action cam on here. So although this drone here is compatible with all the modern VTX and camera in the market, you can put HD0, you can put DJI obviously, you can put Walk-Snail, even analog on this because they give you multiple camera mounts on here. It really doesn't make any sense because now you're kind of locked into DJI. And the reason I say that is that this is a cinewhoop. This drone was designed to capture smooth cinematic images. So let's just say I wasn't a DJI user, say I was an HD0 user or maybe an analog user. If I put HD0 or analog in this, then I really can't capture smooth cinematic 4K image. Those are, well, at least the analog is an analog feed. The image quality from analog and from HD0 isn't the best. They're not known for those qualities. Now we have a modern VTX by Walk-Snail. That one now has 4K on there, but the older style of Walk-Snail VTX is only good for 1080p. You can't record 4K. So at this point, DJI really is the only option because this is the only camera that can record stabilized 4K images to the actual DVR. In fact, HD0 and analog doesn't have a DVR. So if you're using any other systems besides DJI O3, then how are you gonna capture those 4K images? And that means an action camera. Now, as I said before, almost all the other drones in the market have some kind of an action camera mount on here for something like a naked GoPro, SMO 4K, even a 360 Go 2, or even the affordable, Runcam Thumb Pro W. Those are all good options for this drone and they're not too light. Now, we're not expecting to carry a full-size GoPro on here, but just the ability to have, I don't know, a small action camera on here, especially if you're not using DJI O3, it's almost a necessity. So in a sense, you're kind of, they're kind of forcing your hand into using the DJI O3, although this drone is compatible with all the other modern VTX on the market. So overall, I do think that it's a missed opportunity with this on the frame design. They could easily put a camera mount on here. Granted, there's a screw on here where they can probably mount one. You can print one eventually and put one on here, but I don't see any option because this is the tray for the battery right here, and that's gonna get in the way or interfere with the loading or mounting of the battery on here. But this should have made some kind of a feature where not only is the FPV camera dampened, but an action camera is also dampened on here. But like I said, it's a missed opportunity, and I do think that they can resolve that in the second iteration of this drone. So overall, what do I think about this CineHawk Mini? Well, I do think EMAX did succeed in what they were trying to accomplish, and that is a smaller version of this CineHawk, something that's lighter and that can be flown also indoors and outdoors. This thing is confidence inspiring, is more compact. You can travel with this a lot easier than the larger brother, which is 3.5 inches. And this thing should generate the similar image compared to the actual original CineHawk. Now, it's not as powerful and as fast as the original unit, but this one here is more versatile, where you can fly this both indoors and outdoors, guys. Now, is this drone perfect by any means? Not really, but it does deliver on its promise, and that's to capture smooth cinematic 4K images. This thing is easy to fly, and it is confidence inspiring. I'll go as far as saying that if you're a beginner pilot and you just want to skip these smaller tiny whoops in these small RTF kits, this could be the perfect first drone for you. This thing here is docile, it's forgiving, and it's not even overpowered. This thing you can fly both indoors and outdoors. Not only that, it's very, very durable. You can't really get into too much trouble with this drone overall. So I do think that they have a winner on their hands, and it's priced adequately well, especially if you have your VTX laying around. Now, if you're looking for a drone with a little bit more spice, I got one right here. This is the EMAX Apex. This thing is super fast. In fact, it was designed specifically for speed and racing. I've done a full review on this one, and I'll leave a link right here. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.